Guten Tag, hey everyone. In 1940, a group of Jewish Germans were crossing the Pyrenees Mountains on the French-Spanish border in order to escape Nazism. They had escaped Germany to France, but now France was also occupied by the Germans. They were heading towards the United States of America via Portugal. However, the Spanish authorities, under the reign of General Franco, told the group that they would be deported back to France the next day. Knowing that returning to Nazi-occupied France was a death penalty, one of the members, a 48-year-old man, took his own life. At the time, he was only known among a small circle of intellectuals, university professors, and scholars in Germany as a decent cultural critic and writer. However, decades later, when his works were published, he became known as one of the greatest minds of the 20th century. Just like Franz Kafka, Walter Benjamin is considered one of the geniuses of the last century. However, both writers were a failure in their lifetime. Benjamin's story is a story of a brilliant young man with high hopes of becoming a university professor, a literary mind with a great career, but ended in a tragic death. Then years later, he had a miraculous resurrection. So who was Benjamin? What are some of his best works, and was he a genius? If so, what makes him a genius? In this video, I'll answer these questions. Walter Benjamin was born in 1892 in Berlin into a wealthy Jewish German family. While his father was a pragmatic man, a banker, and antique dealer, Benjamin grew up surrounded by thinkers, scientists, psychologists, intellectuals in his own extended family. So his goal in life was to be a university professor and do intellectual activities on the side. He was 8 at the turn of the century, so he had high hopes of a bright future, a 19th century dream, so to speak. As a somewhat sickly child, Benjamin took refuge in reading books, fiction as well as philosophical books. Instead of dealing with actual antiques, like his father, he was more interested in antique ideas. In 1912, he entered Freiburg University and later Berlin University to study philosophy, where he also encountered Zionism. Now he had two paths in front of him: either go to Palestine to help establish a Jewish state, or stay in Germany to become a university lecturer. Benjamin was conflicted between his Jewish heritage and German upbringing. The European Zionists at the time were trying to establish a secular Jewish state by lobbying the European powers like the British and the French. Finally, Benjamin felt he was more German and European than a Jew, so he pursued his academic career in Germany by diving deep into European culture. Benjamin loved poetry, so in his 1916 essay on language as such and on language of man, he argues that language is not merely a tool of communication of factual reality, but also an amazing weapon to sway others, stir emotions, create a vibe, an atmosphere which goes beyond its verbal limit. A good way to explain this is to see the difference between a story and information. Both may have the same information, but they impact differently. Information satisfies the need to know something intellectually, but stories move you emotionally. So language is not just a conveyor of information, it is capable of moving an army, a nation, and empires. No surprise that in 1933, someone in Germany utilized his linguistic ability to give speeches to move an entire nation to fight on 4 fronts. You cannot convince a nation of 70 million people in 1938 with about 20 million soldiers to fight against an army as big as 130 million soldiers. It would be madness, but that is the power of language. Benjamin argues that language is like animism. Everything, including rocks, has a language, as in everything has a spirit. So language is deeply spiritual, not just a tool of information, but deeply tied to our own very essence. This was a groundbreaking idea, so as an intelligent young man, Benjamin's future looked bright. He was very optimistic that he would go very far within German academia. Then disaster happened. World War I devastated Europe and Germany paid a hefty toll. Despite avoiding the war himself by moving to Switzerland to read French literature and translate Baudelaire into German, The war changed the course of Germany, as a result, the course of Benjamin's life. As his fellow Germans struggled with the economic cost of the war, Benjamin retreated deeper into poetry, fiction, and antique ideas. And finally, when he received his doctorate in 1919, it was pretty much useless in a country that desperately needed practical men, not an expert on German romanticism. So Benjamin, confused young man, moved back into his parents' basement. What do you do when you feel that life is unfair and it sucks? You seek clarity, or someone who gives you black and white answer. Benjamin became a Marxist. Then something incredible happened in Frankfurt. Benjamin wasn't alone in being lost in the early 20th century. Despite the general atmosphere of Germany being ominous at the time, a group of Marxist intellectuals, mostly Jewish, wanted to answer one simple question that had puzzled so many people. Why didn't the European workers unite during World War I? Karl Marx boldly predicted that all workers would unite to overthrow capitalism. But during the war, the poor German workers and the poor French workers were butchering each other, not their masters. Were they stupid, or is there something else going on? In 1923, these intellectuals teamed up to found a new school at the Goethe University in Frankfurt, today known as the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, to answer these questions by focusing their attention away from Marx's economic theory. According to Marx, a society is formed by two structures: infrastructure, which is basically the economy, and superstructure, which is basically the culture. So whoever controls the economic system, for example, the capitalist class, they also determine culture. So to change the culture, you need to change the economic system. But these Frankfurt intellectuals argued that it is actually culture that determines which side workers fight on. Culture determines nationalism. Nationalism as a culturally learned story is indeed stronger than the material class inequality. A poor worker may have no food, but he will fight for his country because he sold the culture of patriotism. Like in a bee or ant colony, the workers do not unite to fight the queen, but instead they fight other colonies. Humans are no different. A nation is like a colony, and nationalism is basically beeism. So Frankfurt School gave our Benjamin high hopes. He applied for a teaching job. They said no. But why? He was perfect with his deep insight into culture, particularly the tragic dramas of early German literature, French poetry, and early 20th century fiction. As it turns out, Germans are practical even in their cultural studies. Benjamin was too unconventional in his thoughts. He returned to his basement for the second time to play video games and eat sausage and drink beer. But his father had enough of him, so he stopped his allowance. "You're a grown-ass man." Benjamin became desperate, so he turned to the Soviets. In 1926, he visited Moscow to persuade the Soviets to publish his works. But his actual reason was a beautiful Latvian actress. Despite his lack of job prospects, he was a horny young man. While in Moscow, he also witnessed the fight between two silverback socialists, Joseph Stalin and Leon Trotsky, with the former defeating the other, taking over the Eastern European territory. He returned empty-handed, so in desperate attempt, Benjamin started translating Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time. It was the wrong move. Just like 99% of people attempting to read Proust, after translating just one volume, he gave up. To make matters worse, his wife also left him in 1930. The man had no future, but worse is yet to come. So perhaps Marx was right that materials are more important than ideas. Benjamin pushed back. When you have no money, no wife, no future, what can you do? You think about the meaning of life. What is being? Poor and rejected from any academic career, Benjamin utilized his linguistic ability to write. Published in 1928, One Way Street is a meditative work that includes fragments, aphorisms, jokes, random political pieces, and notes. Martin Heidegger's masterpiece of existentialism, Being in Time, published in 1927, so Benjamin formulating his own ontological philosophy of existence. If everything has a linguistic essence, then what is life and what is being? For Heidegger, being is located between two events, birth and death. That is it. We exist in a finite time. In other words, we have a solid existence between birth and death. You could say it's a linear existence, like traveling from A to B, like on a German autobahn. While Benjamin agrees that being is a one-way street between two events of birth and death, it is not as linear as Heidegger claims it to be. At times, we fall madly in love and forget ourselves, and then out of love to regain our notion of self. At times, life is great, and at times, life sucks. He says, quote, "The power of a country road is different when one is walking along it from when one is flying over it by airplane." Heidegger analyzed being like a bridge that takes you from A to B, while Benjamin saw life as something to be experienced intuitively, which cannot be analyzed, like the act of crossing the bridge. No matter how much you analyze and measure a bridge, your analysis cannot capture the act of crossing the bridge. Heidegger's philosophy of being makes us almost mechanical beings that stagger between birth and death like zombies. For Benjamin, being is more like a hero's journey in which one is molded by trials and tribulations. Heidegger focused on the geometrical shape of existence between two dots or two events in time. Benjamin focused on the person who traverses this precarious journey. Heidegger relied on reason and time to explain existence, while Benjamin emphasized not just reason, but also experience, intuition, and passion that are as important to being as reason and time. For Benjamin, life is not like a man walking on a one-way street until he meets his death. It's tragic from the very start. So the meaning of life is to experience tragedies. His own life is a perfect example. Published in 1928, The Origin of German Tragic Drama is an essay on the German Baroque drama of 16th and 17th centuries. These dramas were stories of political rivalries that resulted in bloodshed and cruelty, somewhat similar to the Greek tragedies, which describe the human condition with its animalistic tendencies of inflicted violence and pain. The religious or cosmological order of life and afterlife promoted love, but these tragic dramas showed that humans may believe in the afterlife, but they live and struggle in the here and now. We live and die in the present. It was the case throughout history that if your enemy was knocking on your door, you didn't think about heaven or hell. You had to defend your family, tribe, or kingdom, no matter how much violence and tragedy you might have inflicted on other fellow creatures of God. These 16th century German dramas, on paper, would repeat itself in the 20th century during two world wars and Germany being at the very heart of both tragedies. For Benjamin, an individual life is always tragic, just like Buddhists believe that life is suffering. While victories are shared by a tribe or group, pain and suffering are the sole responsibility of the individuals. Lack of job prospects seemed insignificant to the catastrophe that was about to happen to him and his country, Germany. Nazism was a new story gripping Germany. Benjamin knew how myths were formed and how powerful they could become. So in 1932, with the rapid rise of fascism, Benjamin left his parents' basement in Germany altogether. First, he settled in Spain, then south of France and Italy. Nice weather and nice pizza, and the Latin culture suited his artistic and literary mood better. Germany was like a giant machine, rattling and screeching at the time, so no place for an artist. While away from Germany, he wrote one of his most famous works. Art used to be the privilege of rich aristocrats and kings, but thanks to modernity, it's now experienced by almost anyone. Published in 1935, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction is Benjamin's most famous book. He says a work of art has a soul, aura, that cannot be reproduced and always remains with the original artist or the location and in time it was produced in. However, modernity created tools that reproduce art at a crazy rate, like mass cinema and photography. For the sake of efficiency in cost and time, mechanically reproduced art no longer possesses the aura it once had. However, while reproduced art lacks aura, it makes up for the fact that it is accessible to most people, so it is more democratic. So this new development has not only turned art into a great tool for propaganda, but it also allowed everyone, rich or poor, to enjoy art both physically and spiritually. But unfortunately, art doesn't feed your empty stomach. So now Benjamin, a poor young man, perhaps hungry and still stuck in France, took on a fight against one of the giants, his uncle Marx. Saying Heidegger is wrong is one thing, but saying Marx is wrong is a whole different ballgame. In his 1940 essay, Thesis on the Philosophy of History, Benjamin criticizes Marx's theory of history. Marx says that human civilization is driven by historical materialism, its infrastructure, economic production, and its superstructure, religion, culture, norms, stories, and myths. In other words, economic production is the driver of culture. Benjamin, however, disagrees. Steeped in French poetry, German Romanticism, deeply influenced by writers like Goethe and Kafka, Baudelaire, Proust, Benjamin sees stories and myths to be the reason why Marx was wrong. Even the root of the word history and story is the same. If hunting is economic production and it brings people together around a fire, what keeps them after their stomach is full and the food is gone? It is through stories that humans bond. Let's not go too far. Marx's own theory of history is like a story. The 5 periods of human evolution from the primitive communism, slavery, feudalism, capitalism, and finally communism is just a fancy story to bond the communists together, just like religions have a story that takes you from the Garden of Eden to the future heaven. To mobilize an army, a material promise would be spoils of war, which motivates mercenaries. But the story of good against evil has been much stronger motivation in human warfare. A hungry stomach might push us to kill animals, but stories can push us to kill other humans, other tribes, and other nations. Quote, "There is no document of civilization that is not also a document of barbarism." As his fellow Germans were knocking on the French door, Benjamin spent his days inside a shopping arcade watching and observing human behavior. While the leaders decide the fate of the nations, individuals, however, scurry from place to place, mesmerized by what is in front of them. Progress in history is only achieved through misery for some individuals. Published posthumously in 1980, the Arcade Project is Benjamin's last work that remained unfinished due to his untimely death in 1940. It's about his experiences and reflections of watching people in the shopping arcades of Paris, where merchants, customers, idlers, and street beggars interacted, some busy selling, some buying, some observing, and some killing time. Life for the individual happens now, not in distant past or future heaven. While a civilization's purpose lies in some future world, our experience of life is only here and now. When revolutions come around, people suffer in the here and now. But societies, civilizations, empires, and nations, etc. move on, and the individual's suffering is always in the present. Quote, "The concept of progress must be grounded in the idea of catastrophe. That things are status quo is the catastrophe. It is not an ever-present possibility, but what in each case is given. Thus, hell is not something that awaits us, but this life here and now." Growing up, Benjamin gazed at life through a Marxian historical materials lens that sees matter above ideas and sees nature as a battle for survival between the haves and the have-nots. As he matured in age, Benjamin rejected this. He saw art, language, storytelling, myths, and other non-material experiences like love, psychogeography, as important to our existence as the material necessities of life. These non-material entities cushion us from the life which is tragic. Victories are enjoyed by a group, but tragedies are absorbed by the individuals. Benjamin grew up full of hopes and optimism of being a university professor in Germany, respected by his peers and students. But history had other ideas. 2 world wars, millions of people dead, countries in turmoil, and tragedies everywhere. Without a job, his father abandoned him, then his wife did the same, but worse still, his country also abandoned him by taking away his citizenship. He wandered around until he ran out of places he could go. Without a family, wife, country, or passport, Benjamin decided to leave Europe for America. Just like all his other attempts at life had failed, this too failed. So he took matters in his own hands and ended his life in 1940 while crossing the Pyrenees Mountains by overdosing with morphine. Life was painful and he numbed the pain with morphine. When the Spanish authorities learned about this terrible tragedy, they allowed his companions to safely cross to Portugal and escape Europe for America. So Benjamin's last act saved a few people. He was 48 years old. This was another German tragedy which not only killed millions of people, it also led to millions of people leaving the country, including Benjamin. Germany lost most of its manpower, but also some of its best minds, including scientists, artists, intellectuals, and thinkers. Just like Kafka, Benjamin died an unknown man, failed in his attempts to get a job, have a wife, have a country, and even in his attempt to escape Europe. Also like Kafka, Benjamin too was resurrected after his death when his works were published in 1955. Ever since, he has been considered as one of the geniuses of the 20th century, a genius who understood the power of stories. While you may fail to get a job, have a wife, have a country, or have friends, your story of failure can still keep you alive long after you're gone. Fail all you want, as long as you have a story to tell, you have won in life's biggest challenge. I'll leave you with this quote. As long as there is still one beggar around, there will still be myth. Dankeschön. Thank you so much for watching.